right, everybody, welcome back to the Den of Sin. That's Den of CIN, Den of Sin with Devin and James. How you doing, James?
I'm doing good, Devin. Excited to record today.
Me too. And, this is actually a landmark episode in our podcast. This is our first quote-unquote new episode. We posted for the first time online. We are now available on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, we're on Google Podcasts. We're all over the place. Anywhere that you want to find us, you can find us. We started with the first 3 episodes that we had recorded in the past weeks, and this is the first thing that we're posting after we have started. So I'm very excited for it. We do have an online presence now. I don't know how many of you all have Facebook and Twitter. I'm guessing most of you. But you can find us now. Facebook, search for Den of Sin Podcast. Make sure you're getting the spelling right. CIN as in cinema. And our Twitter handle is at den_of_sin CIN. So let's start getting a conversation started about these movies we're talking about. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear any thoughts that you have on the things we mention, or if there's anything we leave off. I know we left off about half of 1980 last time. We could still return to that and get a whole bunch.
Absolutely.
This week, James, you and I have decided to talk about one of our favorite genres, werewolves.
Werewolf movies.
Subgenre, I guess I should say.
I was going to say, yeah. A genre within a genre. Sometimes within a genre.
Exactly.
But a very underlooked, underappreciated subgenre of horror, I consider. I feel like it is I feel like the werewolves and the wolfmen have never really gotten their real due the way that like vampires have, the way that ghosts have, the way that a lot of other creatures have. I mean, goddamn, even Gilman type monsters have won Academy Awards, so yeah, but
exactly.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is it's definitely. I feel like there's a ton of really great werewolf movies out there. Some well known, but I think a lot maybe that aren't that well known. So I'm excited to talk about them today.
Me too. And I'm excited to talk about subgenres in general, because our last couple of episodes, we've done 2 on particular artists, and now we've done 1 on a particular year. And the things that appear on those lists are undeniable. You can't say something is not a Burt Reynolds movie. You can't say something did not come out in 1980. You can say something doesn't belong to a genre, and there can be debate as to whether something deserves inclusion on the list. And I have a couple of them I want to bring up later on. Not just yet, but a little later on. I'll mention a couple of movies to you and see what you think about where they fit on the werewolf list, if at all.
All right. Yeah, excited. Before we go into the movies, I'd like to share a little story with our viewers, our listeners, the dozens of listeners. So, as a kid, we've discussed we're both approaching middle age at this point. Maybe
approaching.
We're waiting in the station. But so I grew up as a kid, by this point in the story, it's early 80s. But at the time, a line of toys had come out by this company called Remco. It was the Remco Universal Monsters.
Oh, yes. I had all of them. The big ones and the little ones.
Dude. Yeah, exactly. Yes, because they had the 8-inch kind of Mego-style ones. Which actually had this feature where they would squeeze and crush you, but they were beautifully, the packaging was great. Remco was a kind of a low brand. Remco did a lot of knockoffs. Like if Mattel had Heat Masters of the Universe, Remco had Warlord. Galoob had, WWF. Remco had the AWA wrestlers. So, but with the Universal Monsters, man, they fucking crushed it. Everything about it. They came in 2 lines, 8-inch and then the 3 3/4 inch, kind of like, Kenner Star Wars style, just 5 points of articulation, little plastic figures. But they were fucking great. The packaging was great. They were beautiful.
And the later ones glowed in the dark.
Exactly. And in fact, we had Devin. You've seen my toy rooms on camera. Yes. You haven't seen it in person. But so I'm an avid toy collector, but they're extremely expensive these days. But again, I had them all when we were kids. The story is, this kind of speaks to the power of cinema and also monsters and escapism. But so when I was a kid, so as you do, I have 2 brothers, I have a twin brother and an older brother, and you always split up. You have to pick your favorite members of the Super Friends. You had to pick your favorite Star Wars character. Well, we always had our favorite monsters. My older brother Mike had Frankenstein. I had the Gillman, and my twin brother Joe, he loved the Wolfman. That was his favorite. Well, he got really sick, and It was like right around Christmas time, and he had to go to the hospital. And the only thing he wanted was the Wolfman Remco figure, the 3 3/4 inch. And my poor father, rest in peace, rest in peace, pops. But my poor father went to like 6 or 7 different toy stores trying to find it. He was gone for hours, and he came back to the hospital when we were all waiting there, and run ragged. You could tell he was done with the day, but he had the little Wolfman figure, and I swear the look on my twin brother's face was like, you know, he's in pain. I'm not going to go into the full details. He doesn't want me sharing his business, I'm sure. We could have him on the podcast, and he can feel if he wants to share that story. But but the look on his face was like, you know, he didn't care that he was in the hospital. He had a little Wolfman figure. And, again, that's the power of cinema and of, these characters, because, if you have an imagination, if you have a love of especially, like I said, there's something about those universal monsters, which they just really captured the imagination, those classic designs, which we could go into all the, but yeah. But for this day, like, I can't, every time I hear anything Wolfman, especially, like I said, the original, the Lon Chaney Wolfman, it just makes me think of my brother. It makes me think of the story. And also just it makes me think of like how much fun monsters are, and specifically, the Wolfman and werewolves. So I just wanted to tell that personal story because, like I said, it's something it's a deep memory for me. It's one of my earliest memories too. But and again, I think like the Universal monsters in general, the Creature from the Black Lagoon, the Bride of Frankenstein, Phantom of the Opera, they all have had like remakes and multiple versions of films and stuff. But I think, like I said, I think the Wolfman is kind of often overlooked. I think a lot of the attempts to remake the Universal monster style Wolfman haven't been as successful. But there's a ton of great werewolf movies. I'm sort of rambling at this point, but was there any movie you want to start talking about? Any specific werewolf movies that you love and you need to talk about first?
Well, I've got a bunch that I love. I'm with you. It's really one of my favorite subgenres. I grew up obsessed with the Wolfman. I'm sitting here. I'm looking at your face. You're looking at my face. We both look like Wolfmen at this point.
That's right. I look a little bit less than I did a week ago, but yes,
you
looking pretty
got
wolfy.
a bit of a trim. You got a bit of a trim.
Yeah.
You're looking good. I'm definitely in need of a trim. I have hardly been out of the house the last however months it's been.
You're like mid-transformation.
Right, exactly. But I do think let's go ahead and start at the top, because you did bring up the Universal monsters, and one thing that I discovered this week, because of course I was going to look up what was the first werewolf movie. I found there was one made in 1913 that was simply called The Werewolf, and it has the greatest plot. It's a Navajo woman who turns into a werewolf to avenge the death of her father at the hands of some crooked white settlers, which sounds amazing as a werewolf movie.
Somebody needs to remake that.
Something that was made over 100 years ago, and the first werewolf was a woman. Her name was Phyllis Gordon, and I want to give her a shout out too, because I discovered that the company that made this movie was the company that ultimately became Universal Studios. So the first werewolf was a Universal monster, and it was a woman. And I thought
that's
really cool.
That's really interesting. I've never heard that before.
And unfortunately, I would love to tell you where you can find the film, but it was lost in a Universal vault fire in 1924.
I was gonna say, of course it was. Yeah.
So you can find a poster for it online. It doesn't have any of the imagery of the wolf itself, and it's a rather boring poster, as a lot of early posters were. But there's evidence that it existed, and people would have to wait over 10 years until 1925, when there was another silent werewolf movie that does still exist. And of course, I watched it. It's called Wolf Blood, A Tale of the Forest, and it is not very good, but you can find it on YouTube. And it is one of those ones that kind of cheats about is it or isn't it a werewolf? Everyone's afraid it's a werewolf, and in the end, there's an explanation for it. So it's almost a stretch to say it's a werewolf movie, but I'll take it because there wasn't anything else to compare it to back then, which takes us smack dab into the Universal era, a couple years after Dracula, when they tried with Werewolf of London. And I think we should talk about Werewolf of London.
We should definitely talk about Werewolf of London
of all time.
That's right. I actually have a tattoo of Henry Hull's Werewolf of London on my leg. I think visually, still, my favorite. I think Curse of the Werewolf, the Hammer's Curse of the Werewolf, looks crazier, so I kind of also love the Curse of the Werewolf design, but I love that Henry Hull design because he still looks like a man, but just like a feral man, and he has those, those strong teeth. I just love the aesthetic. What's up?
That was by design, too. The Universal did not want to not show the face of their movie star, Henry Hall, who
Yep.
people out there probably don't know nowadays, but was actually a legitimate movie star back in whenever that was, 1940 or 1935.
1935, yeah.
Jack Pierce, who did the makeup for all those old classic Universal movies. And if you don't know who Jack Pierce is, shame on you. Everybody should know who Jack Pierce is. He's as responsible for what we know as Frankenstein's monster as Mary Shelley is.
Absolutely.
The
most iconic design. Yeah.
He did all of those, and he had what later became the Lon Chaney Jr. werewolf design ready to go on Curse of the Werewolf. And Universal chickened out and said, no, we got to show Henry Hall's face. And what a compromise, though. It looks really good, and it's still my, probably my second favorite werewolf look.
Again, you said he was a very dapper London, metropolitan wolf, urban wolf at the time. But
he actually grabs his hat on his way out to terrorize the community.
That's right. Exactly.
He stops and gets his hat because a werewolf doesn't go out without his hat.
His hat, and that's the thing I liked. I mean, because it still shows that level of man inside the wolf. But it's a great movie. It's actually a really great movie. Still. A lot of I've had this discussion on other podcasts, but I feel like as we get further away from that era, people find it less and less interesting and like much harder to relate, and they don't like the acting seems stilted or theatrical, overly theatrical.
They also got an Englishman to play a Chinese scientist,
which is exactly. Yeah, well, it's all the
era
of Charlie
character,
Chan.
But yeah, in fact, this guy was Charlie Chan. He was the actor.
Exactly. But yeah, like I think the further we get away, like society gets away from the era, people they haven't seen those movies, and I feel like they're doing themselves a disservice because they're fucking great. Especially, like I said, the cinematography of the Wolfman. We'll get to it. Like just a great looking movie, very unique. But yeah, a Werewolf of London. Like I said, I have a tattoo of Henry Hall on my leg. Definitely one of my favorite werewolf movies of all time.
Me too. It's also the movie that gave us the word werewolfery. He's trying to cure his werewolf.
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
Fake word.
I almost literally brought that up.
And he's the only werewolf that talks. I can't think of any other werewolf that it's not like he's loquacious. He's not rambling on like we are, but he does have dialogue in the werewolf outfit.
Oof. Yep.
I think he apologized to everybody as he's dying. Not of a silver bullet, too, by the way. So
we should actually, before we go on, we should definitely talk about lycanthropy and the shapeshifters and werebeasts. That mythology's existed for hundreds of years. It's existed in lots of different cultures. Traditionally, the Western idea of the wolf, the werewolf, which has, like I said, roots a lot in Native American culture. A lot of things like in mythology, it wasn't silver bullets. That was a movie fabric, or that was something the movies added. In fact, silver was actually always
German. I only found this out this week too. Kurt Siodmak, who wrote The Wolfman with Lon Chaney Jr., he was German, and silver, not silver bullets specifically, but silver itself was deadly to lycanthropes in German folklore.
Well, that's what I was actually going to say, is that in European mythology, I mean, the origins of whether it's vampires, ghouls, anything that was super unnatural, even going back to things like medieval lore, like trolls and goblins and that thing, anything that was pure and of the earth, such as silver, was deadly to creatures of the night and those kinds of beasts. So, and I think that's why, like, specifically, but in a lot, like I said, in a lot of Western mythology, the only thing that could really kill a werewolf was fire. There was things like wolf's bane. If you put wolf's bane in its mouth, like there's all these different mythological ways to kill a werewolf. But again, it's like if you've ever deep dived into the history of the vampire specifically and see how many cultures have vampires and how goddamn different they all are. So it's like, but still very fascinating, and seeing where these wolves. And one thing I've always loved about the Wolfman is the use of the mark of the devil and like the whole gypsy curse thing, and
and the gypsy poem,
not a lot of other.
Even a man who's pure. I'm not going to be able to remember it all, but if you guys know the Wolfman, you know the gypsy poem. Even a man who's pure as heart and says his prayers at night will become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the moon is something big and bright. It wasn't full. The moon wasn't full until the second Lon Chaney Wolfman. He turned into a werewolf and the wolfbane blooms, and I guess you could imply the wolfbane blooms in a full moon, but it wasn't specifically mentioned until later in the series.
The one thing is that even doing, like I said, I feel like when we do these podcasts, I know you're like the fact guy. You know, you're going to do all your research and stuff, and I'm just sort of the seat of my pants guy. But one thing is, like, again, realizing how many like Wolfman movies there are, like how many versions of the actual Universal monster kind of version of them. How many I haven't actually seen. Once you get into the 50s, they become very cartoonish. They become very like almost for kids more. But yeah, they it was a character that did get some traction in the golden age of the Universal Studios.
I've got the Wolfman, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula, and Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. So he's only the sole star of one movie.
But yeah, so yeah, I think Frankenstein versus the Wolfman, I think, is probably only the second of those Lon Chaney that I actually remember seeing. I've probably seen others, and I know I've seen the Abbott and Costello. But yeah, I mean, obviously, if you think about the classic Wolfman, obviously Lon Chaney Jr. has that. I mean, he is, and most film historians, he is the Wolfman. He is probably the single most recognizable werewolf. I think second would probably be the second most recognizable or most beloved werewolf movie, in my opinion, as far as popularity and recognition, would probably be American Werewolf in London. Obviously, there's lots of different versions of werewolves, different werewolf movies, but I think that is mainly known for like a more modern interpretation of the werewolf legacy, of the werewolf mythology, and obviously like well known for its effects and it being sort of this really sort of audacious sort of horror comedy. But obviously it's a great movie, but I definitely feel like if there's in most of the public consciousness, you have that Lon Chaney Jr. werewolf, the Wolfman, and then I think the second most popular, well-known werewolf movie would be American Werewolf in London. Do you agree with that, or do you think there's a different movie that's sort of that inheritor?
I completely agree. Well, for me, American Werewolf in London is my favorite werewolf movie. We can get into that now if you want to. I was going to bring up at some point how amazing 1981 was in general for werewolves. It's kind of the year of the werewolf.
Yeah. Yes, it is. In fact, yes. In fact, I obviously, like, if you like movies in general, you have to love American Werewolf in London. It's definitely in my top 3 favorite werewolf movies. It's not my number one, but it's sometimes tied with my number one. But it's obviously a fucking.
Know what that is.
Well, we can talk about it now, or we can get to it.
Well, let's bring.
Do you want to do the other werewolf movies of 1981 though first?
Sure, let's do that. And just real quick, honorable mention, because really, let's be honest, the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s were low decades for werewolfery. But there were a couple of. There was one called The Werewolf that was made in 1956. It's better than most people would guess it was. It also has another very well dressed werewolf. The whole time I'm trying to figure out why the hell doesn't this guy take off his tie? Like 3 days of running through the forest, and he turns back into a man and then back into a wolf, and he never takes off his tie. I don't get it, because he just wants to make an impression. But it's a fun movie, and also credited for saving the horror genre in whole. It was the second bill with Earth versus the Flying Saucers. At that point in time, horror had been pushed to the side by science fiction.
Sci-fi, yep.
We were more into the A-bomb than we were into gypsy curses and things. And the werewolf brought it back into fashion. It was the first werewolf movie in years and years and years. Very successful, and shepherded in I Was a Teenage Werewolf, which is actually better than people think, but also not good.
No, I'm glad I was going to talk about it, because first off, I think it's most well known for this point for sort of being sort of the inspiration for Teen Wolf. Michael Landon, a young Michael Landon. It's probably one of my favorite memories as a kid was watching it. It's so campy. It's such a cash in, trying to get like that teenage drive-in market that was so popular in the 50s. But it's dumb, but it's fun.
It started that though. That's the thing. Like it's the root of that. Like all those I Was a Teenage fill in the blank,
yeah,
came out after this movie. I mean, it was followed by I Was a Teenage Frankenstein, which is one of the dumbest titles of all time.
Yep. And probably the single worst monster makeup design in history. That I Was a Teenage Frankenstein monster makeup actually offends me.
They threw some scrambled eggs on his face or something.
Exactly.
It's alive. But no, it did inspire, like you said, Teen Wolf and Full Moon High and things like that. And it does, though, it has some genuine tension when every werewolf movie is going to involve inevitably someone going through a wooded area alone. They even find a way to get that into American Werewolf. By the way, in London, England, there's a character going through the wilderness alone. The scene that occurs in And I Was a Teenage Werewolf is actually genuinely well played. The tension is pretty high. You don't know when this werewolf's going to jump out. And the performance of Michael Landon's genuinely good. It's sappy, but that's the way the part was written. But
exactly.
Most notable, it was the first horror movie ever to have a rock and roll song on it. And I love that werewolves are responsible for bringing rock and roll to horror movies. And killing teenagers to horror movies. The slasher movies probably owe something to I Was a Teenage Werewolf.
That's definitely, I feel like, though, like, it's such a 50s movie. Like, everything about it just oozes the 50s. Especially said because, again, we a lot of what we remember of the 50s now is what's been popularized is that youth culture stuff, the rock and roll, the drag racing and all that stuff. And so much of that vibe is in I Was a Teenage Werewolf. So it's definitely a fun movie. I highly recommend it. It is. It's a fun time.
It's on YouTube. You should see it. If you're a werewolf fan, you won't regret looking this one up. It is fun. A lot of laughs, some genuine scares, a genuinely sympathetic character. Not bad. It's good. It's good stuff. The last one I'll bring up on any kind of a feature way before we get to the lovely 80s is one you've already mentioned before, The Curse of the Werewolf, which is really worth mentioning because it's the only Hammer movie to have a werewolf. I don't know how this is. Hammer has every monster, multiple sequels on every monster, and yet only one werewolf movie. But it's a gothic classic werewolf story, which is not something you get very often, even in the Universal movies. So that one's and it's also the first film of Oliver Reed, who became a huge star at the time.
I was going to say, yeah, exactly. What a great lead. Like I said, again, typical Hammer, lots of atmosphere, very gothic, great acting.
Lots of gore for the time.
And I think like I said, I think it's probably top 3 of my favorite werewolf designs ever. He's very, especially with the white kind of color, the lighter color, just very striking, very memorable. It's one of those films that was very formal. Like the first time I saw it, it sort of was, it had a big impact on me.
Yeah, very well done, very well acted,
very well. Good
script. The werewolf in this movie is actually, it seems, I can't explain it other than to say that this werewolf is a product of cruelty, which is
that's right. Yeah,
a very interesting take on it. Would still be an interesting take if someone wanted to do that today. And then before we get to the prime cuts here, there's 3 titles I want to list off, just titles alone, because the titles are brilliant. And you can tell how bad these movies are just by the titles alone, but God bless them, I love it. You've got Werewolf in a Girl's Dormitory, classic, yes. Werewolves on Wheels, which was the 1970s werewolf biker movie.
Which I own and is a fun little dumb movie. And then, the poster is genius.
Yes. I have it on DVD. This one I think takes the cake. You might not agree. I'm interested to see what you think. The Rats Are Coming. The Werewolves Are Here. That's the name of the movie.
I've never even heard of that. What the fuck? Wait, I'm sorry. The rats are here, or the rats are coming, and the werewolves are here?
Yes, the rats are already. The rats are on their way.
Get it.
The werewolves are already amongst us. So,
I have to look that
up.
The
werewolves are here. Exclamation points are in the title. 2 exclamation points. The rats are coming. The werewolves are here.
Oh my god! Oh yeah, I remember the poster for it, and I was like, "What?"
It is available on YouTube because you're not going to probably find any special editions of this anywhere. It's directed by Andy Milligan, who, if you are into exploitation movies in 42nd Street Cinema, he is a classic name. He is someone who I will say his biography is probably more interesting than his films. And the only explanation I've been able to pull out is that he did intend to make a werewolf movie. He started off shooting a werewolf movie, and then Willard came out, and the producer
I was going to say, I knew it!
The producer said, can we get some rats in there somehow? So that's why the rats are coming and the werewolves are already here, is because they were an afterthought. They weren't here yet.
Dude, that's incredible. I actually found a pretty sweet T-shirt on eBay. I might have to buy you, Devin. It features the ugliest rat. And that's saying anything, but like it doesn't even look like a rat. It looks like a fucking. It's incredible. Anyways,
James, are you sure it's not the werewolf?
It might be the werewolf. I don't know. It looks like a were-rat wolf. Like it looks like a.
Could be.
Bug-eyed. It's amazing. Well, you've just opened up a fucking Pandora's box for me now, so I'm gonna have to watch that.
I tried and I fell asleep, but that was 3 a.m.
Glowing review.
I had just finished a good werewolf movie, so this was my going to sleep movie anyway. So I might go back and rewatch it myself. But yes, that is my favorite title of a werewolf movie of all time.
That's incredible. The T-shirts by November Fire, so that makes sense. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, obviously the 70s weren't, the high spot for werewolves.
No. But 1981 changed everything, and the 80s in general turned out to be a really good decade for not just werewolves, but horror movies.
Absolutely.
And probably the only really good decade for werewolves. 40s, arguably, because he had the Lon Chaney Jr. stuff coming out, but really...
80s. Yeah,
80s.
Agreed.
And I think it does start with An American Werewolf in London. I think that's the one that we should, because that's the one that excites me. When you say werewolf to me, that is what pops into my head. When I'm telling people that they need to watch horror movies and they don't normally like horror movies, this is one that I really try to sell on the script. This is a horror movie with an amazing script and great dialogue. Most horror movies, even great horror movies, don't have good dialogue. This movie has amazing dialogue. That's
the thing. It's when I obviously I think, like I said, it's probably one of the most important werewolf movies, but it's also just one of the most important horror. Like, it's one of those. You said it perfectly. It's sort of like a gateway drug for horror, because I know a lot of people who don't like horror movies, but they like American Werewolf in London because it's really unique. And again, the horror of it is almost underplayed. There's some horrific. Yeah, exactly.
The horror in it is extremely tragic.
Absolutely. And that's the thing is, and that's why the werewolf is such an interesting character anyways, because, it's somebody is transforming against their will, turning into a beast against their will usually, and they don't want to be a werewolf. They have this affliction that, the full moon turns and they go out and act like a beast and kill livestock or other people or whatever. But American Werewolf in London really captures that. David is such a fucking tragic character. I mean, not just at this point, I don't hear any complaint about spoiler alert, but spoiler alert, doesn't have a happy ending, but
no. One thing that's really interesting about American Werewolf that not only can I not say this about another werewolf movie, but I can't really say this about most horror movies. He's not only haunted by what he's done as a man, he's not only haunted by what he's done when he turns into the wolf, he's literally haunted by the people that he kills, who are now...
Exactly.
They're now zombie-rific, undead ghosts in limbo.
Ghosts.
Whose souls will not go free until he is dead. So it adds a whole nother level of torture and tragedy to this character who's just a schlub who was backpacking across Europe.
Just some young college age guy, just trying to go have adventures and do some backpacking like a lot of young American college kids do.
And Griffin Dunne as the best friend is incredible too.
Griffin Dunne's the best part of the whole. I mean, Griffin Dunne is he's the show stealer in that movie, but it's definitely a case of everything was right.
You're right. Everything. It's a perfect movie.
I mean, it still stands as the single best werewolf transformation in history, and I think it still holds that up. There have been a lot of great werewolf transformation scenes recently with the real development of CGI. That, what is it called? Something Grove? I forget even what it's called. It was a Netflix show. Anyways, it's a werewolf TV show. They had a really great transformation scene, but again, going back to that, everything is practical.
The gold standard.
And one thing I love too is that it's in that movie, the design. I'm a big on design, obviously, character design and makeup design and stuff like that. But is that it's a giant wolf. It has an element of human posture even when it's on all fours. But it's a giant wolf. It's not a man who's a wolf. It's a very intelligent giant wolf. And I think that was an interesting choice. And the fucking design is amazing, terrifying. One of the scariest werewolves ever made.
Yes. Even the howl. I don't know where they got that howl.
Yeah.
But the best werewolf howl. And it did, worthy of note, that it did win the first competitive Oscar for makeup with that transformation scene.
And rightfully so. I mean, it changed everything. Also, one thing I feel like needs to be said, the movie also had a young Jenny Agutter who was very, very cute. I first had a giant crush on her in Logan's Run. And anyways, she was maybe that's where the whole nurse Anyways,
starting to dig a little deep there, James.
Yeah, it's getting too personal, but it's a great. Everything about it is fucking great.
She is great. She adds to the tragedy of this movie. I'm not saying that's not a spoiler. That's just the passion lost. You know, I mean, this werewolf story is a love story.
Yep, absolutely.
In a kind of a weirdly in kind of a lost stray dog kind of way. This is very much a love story. There's a lot of people that care about David in this movie. There's a lot of people that are worried about what's coming up, and they're doubting their own sanity because it's a lot of people confronting, do they believe in werewolves? Will this happen when the next full moon occurs? Just such a great script, such great performance. Such great music.
Really, yep. Fucking the soundtrack is amazing. One thing that I feel like there's just so many like the Nazi demon nightmare sequence.
Dream sequence, yeah.
The dream sequence is probably my favorite thing about the whole. It's terrifying. The whole thing is terrifying when David opens his eyes, like, you know, and he's full on like demonic kind of werewolf. That whole sequence is incredible. Like all the design stuff, just everything about it is so memorable. It's one of those. It's one of those rare movies where I have nothing. I mean, literally, I don't have a criticism against it. Really, like it's just it's amazing. But it is very interesting timing, though, since at the same time that was being made, The Howling was also being made.
Yes. You can't talk about one without talking about the other in so many ways.
No, especially because, again, Rick Baker was supposed to work on on American Werewolf in London, but then he went to work for The Howling instead.
Landis was trying to get Werewolf of London, American Werewolf done for like 10 years. He wrote it when he was high school age, and Baker had promised him he was going to deliver him this effect. But it took so long that The Howling came up, and I'll let you finish that story. But
you probably know it even better than I do. But because that's right. Because Rick Baker had been just a young kid, very young kid when he met Landis, and kind of snuck his way onto some film sets. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I love The Howling. I think it's a great movie. It's got a fucking fantastic script, really great actors. You know, and it's also telling its own kind of almost like an allegory itself. And obviously, of the two, American Werewolf in London is just sort of takes that top spot insofar as it's a little bit more memorable. Like it's funny. But again, I think like the sequence when the werewolf first shows up in The Howling. First off, again, great werewolf design, scary, huge, like those long limbs and stuff, which is very reminiscent.
Clawed fingers, yeah.
Exactly. Very reminiscent of another werewolf movie I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. But I feel bad because I think if American Werewolf in London didn't exist, I think The Howling would be even more loved. The Howling is also plagued
timing in a way.
Yeah, exactly. I think the Howling is also plagued by some really fucking terrible sequels.
The longest running werewolf franchise, though. 7 films.
7 films.
And then an 8th one that came out in 2011 that tried to reboot it and fell on its ass. Apparently Netflix is going to try it again, but it's not of varying quality on the sequels. It is of instant decline from The Howling to the sequels.
Yes, no, exactly. I mean, some of them like kind of just became like TNA movies. Like, I forget the actress's name, but very B movie lady known for just basically getting naked. But was that the Wolfen or The Howling 2? Oh, Wolfen! That's a spoiler alert right there. Yeah. I've probably seen the first 4 of the sequels, but I definitely didn't get so far as the 6th, 7th sequel.
I remember liking the one about the freaks when I was a kid, but I should probably go back and rewatch the one about freaks. I don't know if that was, I think it was 5 or 6. A werewolf in a freak show. It's a fun idea. He's being held captive by a vampire. On the surface of it, it seems like it would be awesome. Right. I think I would have revisited it by now if it was really that awesome.
I don't know. Maybe we need to have a little Howling marathon. See them all back to back.
Right, but I think you're
See how far
absolutely
we
right.
can get.
The first one really kind of got in the shadow of American Werewolf in London, and any other year that would have been not just the best werewolf movie, which is not a hard feat to pull off. Oftentimes it's the only werewolf movie in a year, but it would have been one of the best horror movies in general of that year or any time. But coming right on the heels of American Werewolf in London, The Howling did not get its due. It does have a fan base. It does have a Shout Factory collectible Blu-ray.
I mean, it's a well-liked movie. It's still like it's going to be perennially the second place runner-up to American Werewolf in London. But again, not the only great werewolf movie of 1981, as you've already said. So
yes. Well, you let the title slip out there. Wolfen was the third. Wolfen I had not seen Wolfen since I was a kid until about 2 weeks ago. I forgot how confusing that movie is. It's really good. The performances are fantastic, and
Albert Finney is Albert Finney. So, but
if anybody ever asks you who is the most underrated English actor of his generation, your answer is Albert Finney.
I agree 100%. Absolutely, definitely. It's you nailed it. It's a bizarre movie. It's kind of like, it's a very like political kind of like, like the message of the movie is very
it wants to be woke. It wants to be woke so bad.
It does.
And it just kind of keeps it still just seems like white boy wanting to be woke in terms of the directing and the storytelling.
I couldn't agree more. Yes. But, the whole idea of, it's a very interesting concept for werewolves, like the fact that like they're like this supernatural breed of wolves that form like But it's an interesting movie. I definitely don't think it doesn't stand at the same heights that The Howling or American Werewolf of London hold. But it's definitely, like I said, it's an interesting movie. I still think, for me, it was like, I watched it when I was a kid, and I think the thing that grabbed me was the cover art. The 80s had the most fucking amazing cover art, and that cover art was genius. In fact, I think there's two different cover versions of the cover, if I remember correctly, as a kid, two different VHS covers, and I think they were both good. Yeah, 1981 was an unprecedented year for werewolf movies. Was there any ones that I'm missing? Was there any other werewolf movies of 81?
They were probably all werewolf movies, and I'm forgetting it.
Exactly.
Those three really stand out. I can't remember if Beast Within came out that year. It came out soon after, if it wasn't 1981, and that's not quite a werewolf movie, but it's still,
because it's werewolf-like because it's a boy who transforms, but isn't it like he's like a locust or something? Fucking really weird.
It's been a long time since I've seen that. The title certainly sounds like a werewolf movie, but
yeah, it's weird. He's like a giant like locust, like he transforms into like this. It's not a werewolf. He's like a locust boy or something. It's so weird.
Yeah, it wasn't a wolf.
And I haven't seen it in probably 10 years. But it was like, it was kind of like that same thing where, oh man, I forgot how many, like the special effects are crazy. It was like when he starts to transform. But yeah, I want to make sure I think it's a locust.
Around this time we had Full Moon High too, which is definitely a werewolf movie, but not. I don't know if it was 81 specifically or not, but it's right in there.
See, you said that title, and I actually do not remember that movie.
It was
81, 1981. Oh, I remember the cover.
Alan Arkin's son. What's David Arkin? David Arkin is basically a teen wolf, and Ed McMahon's his dad. It was really weird.
That's right. Ed McMahon it's Larry Cohen.
There we go. Right. Yes, it is Larry Cohen. I forgot it was Larry Cohen. Oh my goodness.
That's right.
So yes, 1981 really was the ultimate werewolf year.
Jesus Christ. Oh man.
I might have to rewatch that one. I don't remember much of it. I remember who's in it. I remember being a kid and thinking it was weird that Ed McMahon was acting. But I love Larry Cohen, so
yeah,
that's probably worth revisiting.
Yeah, it's definitely a comedy, so it's obviously like a silly movie. But yeah, in fact, as soon as I saw that cover, I was like, oh shit, yeah, of course. That's I think 81, man, 81, the year the rebirth of the werewolf movie, 1981. That's crazy.
Right about this time, in fact, it was 82. A movie came out, and this is where I'm going to ask you: does it count as a werewolf movie? The Cat People, or any of the variations of Cat People. There was the originals from the 40s, Cat People, Curse of the Cat People, The Leopard Man, and then the 1982 Paul Schrader directed Cat People.
Cat People is a great movie. I would say, it's a were movie. That's the thing, is it's so hard because, like I said, all
werewolf,
those
obviously.
No, but he's aware. It's a were thing.
But where does it fit? What genre is it if it's not a werewolf movie? And then I'm going to take you a step further. I'll go ahead and just say the title to put it out there. The Shaggy Dog and the Shaggy DA by Disney, which were inspired by I Was a Teenage Werewolf, are those werewolf movies? James, only you have the answers.
I would say no. I'd say, I think to be a true werewolf movie, and like I said, there's movies on this list that are going to be variations of the theme, obviously, but I think essentially like a real werewolf movie has to have an element of tragedy. I don't know. Is there God? Chicken or the egg? Like I don't know if I can answer these questions, Devin.
Come on,
they're
Fred
bigger
McMurray
than me.
Fans want to know.
But I would say, the Shaggy DA. I will say anything produced by the Disney Home Entertainment probably shouldn't count as a werewolf movie. But I don't know, cat people, that's interesting. It's definitely
Cat people is
tangential.
definitely tragic.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's why the only thing that keeps it from being a werewolf is that it's a cat and not the original Val Lewton produced one of the greatest fucking horror movies ever.
Oh,
One of the most beautiful looking movies ever. I mean, the use of shadow in that movie is just next level. But
technically better than any of the Universal werewolf movies, Wolfman movies.
I agree 100%. I agree 100%. And, even though I don't think the Schrader one is as good as the 1942 version, still a great movie. I've talked about it on a different podcast. The sexuality of that movie is, again, Schrader. It's very Schrader, but
it is very Schrader.
But yeah, it's a very interesting movie. I would never have thought of it as a quote unquote werewolf movie, but again, when you think of like where do you put it, it's definitely we'll say it's like a cousin to the werewolf movie. Anything the Werebeast, because there's. Yeah, it's werewolf adjacent. As that, there you go, perfect. But man, yeah, I mean the original Cat People, the 1942, and the remake, the 80s remake, are both great movies. So they'll get special accommodations for this list and say sure, we'll count them as werewolf movies.
All right, cool. I agree with you, and I do think Shaggy Dog's got to find its own genre.
That's right. It's part of the Disney transfer. It's the same thing as the strongest man. Like it's Disney. It's the Disney genre. It's all those goofy ass movies
the
featuring Kurt Russell.
Tennis shoes and
exactly. Yeah.
All right.
Crazy. Yes.
Fair enough. Now I am going to give you a line from a 80s movie. You tell me if it's not the most important lycanthrope line of all time.
I already know what it is. I'm going to write it down. Before you say it, I'm going to write it down and then I'll show you on camera.
All right.
I'm only going to write one word. But go ahead. Go ahead. Tell me what it is.
No, I want to see your note first.
No, you say it first because you're the one that brought it up. Then I'll show you my note.
All right. Wolfman's got nards. He's holding up a sign that says nards, ladies and gentlemen.
Nards
James,
on it. Yeah.
James guessed it was the nards. I got in trouble for that movie. My neighbor across the street when I was growing up, I haven't seen him in decades. But his mom didn't like me because I taught him how to say Wolfman's got nards. So I took some heat for that one.
You've always been a bad influence, Devin.
And for anyone that hasn't guessed yet, Monster Squad is the film. If you
Monster
don't
Squad.
know that that's from Monster Squad, then shame on you.
Yes.
Everybody
What do you
should
listen
know
to this
Monster
podcast
Squad.
for?
Yes.
Monster Squad was probably next to The Goonies, probably the single most important movie when I was a kid because it was about kids. God, I could talk about Monster Squad all night long. First off, it's one of the best versions of a movie sort of aping that Universal aesthetic. All the designs were definitely very much based on the classic Universal monsters, but at the same time,
just different enough to not be legally binding.
Exactly. Like with the Gillman, cool design, but different enough that it wasn't exactly copying the Gillman. But yeah, I mean, I love that movie. Specifically, I really love the Wolfman or the werewolf design. Mm-hmm. And if I'm not mistaken, it's actually the second werewolf type creature that John Grease plays in the 80s because his character in Fright Night 2 turns into a kind of a werewolf-looking creature.
Oh my God, I forgot he was in Fright Night 2 has been unavailable for so long. I think it is available now. I need to see Fright Night 2 again because the original, when we talk vampire movies, we will be going down the road of Fright Night. I forgot John Grease.
If you look at my my screensaver on my computer right now, it is the cover. That's the original movie poster for Fright Night. I still think it and Return of the Living Dead because they're very similar movie posters, but I love those are two of my favorites. But yeah, Jonathan Grease is
the video stores.
Yep, beautiful. But yeah, Jonathan Grease is great. In fact, his werewolf is really kind of like very much a tragic character in that. But the whole thing, like the Wolfman blows they put the dynamite in him, he blows him up, but he still comes back together. But yeah, what a great everything about that. I mean, I love that movie. Has become it's single-handedly responsible for the Stephen King Rules T-shirt, and now the thousands of online copycats of blank, whatever name rules. My friends have a podcast called Forever Midnight. Shout out to those guys. They did one that said Sutter Kane Rules, which was pretty cool because I'm a big fan of In the Mouth of Madness. I mean, definitely, what a great movie and a really cool little werewolf action.
Now that I think about it, Monster Squad was a really big film for my development, I think, because that was I saw that in the movie theaters. I saw it with my dad took my brother and sister and I. We were very young. In fact, I'm surprised my brother and sister, they were so young. I'm surprised they could handle it. But when I came back from vacation, having seen this movie, nobody else had seen it. And nobody saw it until it was on video. It was a huge flop. I think this movie may have had a big part to do with why I'm someone who loves undiscovered movies, because this was a very early undiscovered movie, quote unquote, for me. Telling people, you have to see Monster Squad, and making sure I got a copy of it so that when I had sleepovers and stuff, I could show people, you got to see this movie. And that's how I got in trouble for showing the kid across the street that Wolfman had nards. But I think it was important.
Wolfman's got nards. So one thing that, I've talked about this with my brother, is before that movie came out, and I remember first or second grade, me and my friends had Monster Club, where we literally drew monsters. It was inspired by things like, Masters of the Universe and stuff like that, but we just drew monsters. That's literally what we did. Every recess we'd come and show the monsters we drew. So that's why when I saw that movie, I was like, well, it struck so close to home. And obviously, like I said, I've already shared the Sick Brother Werewolf or Wolfman, Remco toy. We were huge into the Universal Monsters as kids. So, there was the monster kid craze of the 50s and 60s when you really had like the explosion when people sort of rediscovered the Universal stuff. I still wish I was old enough to have grown up in that era to get like those old original Aurora monster model kits and all that stuff. But
famous Monsters of Filmland magazine.
Exactly. But God damn it, I was lucky enough to grow up in the 80s, which was that second wave of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so great. I'm sure you have this on your list, but we haven't mentioned my number one favorite werewolf movie ever, which was right before Monster Squad. And I think one of the most faithful actual adaptations of a Stephen King story ever, Silver Bullet.
I was waiting for you to bring that one up. That couldn't agree with you more. One of the best.
It's so top to bottom. It's so great. Young Corey Haim, when he was still really likable, before God rest in peace, man. I mean, he had poor guy, especially in light of some accusation. Exactly. But he's just so post Lucas and all that stuff. He just, as a kid, I was a huge fan as a kid, but that movie has all of the heart and all of the humanity that Stephen King is so good at that he doesn't always get noticed for. It's like his characters are very they have real human relationships and the struggle between him and his sister. And obviously Corey Haim and his uncle, it's famously played by Gary Busey. In the most perfect role for Gary Busey as the drunk party uncle who designs his souped-up wheelchair to kill werewolves. Oh, so good.
He's the uncle that gives the kid firecrackers and
exactly,
and a wheelchair made out of a motorcycle.
Exactly. But dude, as a kid, I thought it was I was like, I kind of want to be in a wheelchair. I mean, I don't, but
but you want a silver bullet.
Exactly. But
silver bullet painted across the side of this chair.
Exactly. It's such a perfect kind of 80s movie, and I think, so again, spoiler alert, Everett McGill, who's such an interesting guy anyways. I mean, I love him in everything he does, and he's such a creepy looking dude.
What a face.
But
it's the evil version of David Byrne is what I thought of him when I was a kid.
That's I used to actually think he was like the evil version of, to me, he kind of reminded me of Joe Bob Briggs. He kind of looked like
I can see that.
A scarier Joe Bob Briggs. Him playing like the Reverend / the werewolf, so great. I do have to say, the novel Cycle of the Werewolf it was based off of was really important to me as a kid. They had illustrations by the incomparable Bernie Wrightson.
Yes.
Probably, again, as influential to me as anything else. But
my werewolf movie is based on pictures from Bernie Wrightson. The illustrations alone from Cycle of the Werewolf inspired what I wanted my werewolf to be.
The big one.
Yes.
Yes.
Get into that another time. I have a couple of werewolf scripts. One completed and doing all right in festivals, and one that I'm still working on. A continuation.
Well, I mean, I have my fingers crossed because the scripts I've read are fantastic. So, but yeah, I mean, Silver Bullet's perfect. It's just a great 80s. Again, anytime you have young kids who are the protagonists, where nobody believes them and stuff, it's the odds seem more insurmountable and stuff. Especially one of them's in a wheelchair, but it's just a great movie. Love the makeup design. The score is great. Everything about it's great, and I think
the mystery of it too. It doesn't get mentioned often enough. Most werewolf movies are about the werewolf. This is a movie where someone's trying to figure out who in his community is the werewolf. And once you figure it out, you've either figured it out before the film tells you, or you're smacking your forehead saying, how did I not figure that out?
I didn't see that yet.
It's not one of the great mysteries of all time, but it's
there's a dream sequence that kind of
but it's a different approach to the werewolf story. And I've always appreciated the fact that it was about someone trying to stop the werewolf instead of the werewolf trying to figure out if he should commit suicide or,
That's right. Exactly. Begging somebody to keep him locked up.
This werewolf does not want to die. This werewolf likes being a werewolf.
That's right. And is truly scary. And that's the thing, that's why as a kid, so important, had such an impact on me. Because first off, you don't think a Corey Haim, Gary Busey movie is going to be truly scary, but it's actually really scary.
Oh yeah.
And it definitely holds up. I do have a soft spot for 80s horror. It even says so on my laptop, and I have a hat that says it now. I'm just very big in 80s horror, but I think it's because a lot of those movies still hold up because the heart of them, there's an essence and a humanity and a general passion that they have that without the same time they're not trying to be, we've discussed this already, but these days, so many of these modern horror movies are so self-referential. They're like, I love Texas Chainsaw Massacre, so my movie's like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and they just become blatant soulless ripoffs. The 80s, besides people were just trying to do something wholly unique, but Tom Holland might have been a fan of old horror movies, but when he made Fright Night, it was completely its own thing with a fully realized script and a complete original story.
But undeniably paying tribute to those things that he loved.
But exactly. You could definitely see but it didn't seem like he was just trying to cash in on some other pre-established film. He was taking a whole kind of experience, the whole midnight horror host thing, old black and white, very gothic style, especially some Hammer horror stuff, but making its own thing and telling a really unique story with originally unique characters and a fucking vampire named Jerry. I think Silver
Bullet was doing a lot of that too, though, and I think.
But that's what I'm saying. Exactly, it's the same thing.
There's moments. This is not the Hardy Boys meets Reverend Werewolf, and.
Exactly.
Or Gary Busey hesitantly goes to help the kids fight the werewolf, and he has to tell the guy who he hires to make the Silver Bullet, my nephew has discovered the Lone Ranger. I mean, there's so many pop culture references right in there, paying tribute to the things that came before and the ridiculousness in a lot of ways of what came before, despite the fact that we love it. Silver Bullet was great at that. I did want to say before we move away from Silver Bullet, though, I went to, this is at least 10 years ago now, I went to a werewolf triple feature at the Arrow Theater in Santa Monica. And it was American Werewolf in London, The Howling, and Silver Bullet. Probably the greatest triple feature I've ever attended. And they surprised us. It turned out the director of Silver Bullet was there, and he got up and did a little Q&A. And this was maybe a month before Corey Haim passed away. So there was enough humor left in the reservoir. It hadn't become ultimate tragedy yet. And this guy was joking about how he sort of regrets being the one to ever put Corey Haim in the same room as Gary Busey. And I do think that's worthy of mentioning. I love Gary Busey. I'm not saying Gary Busey gave Corey Haim his problems. I think we can probably point to some other very well-known actors who did. But there's those considerations. That's something that's part of this film culture at this point. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's,
it wouldn't have gotten that same chuckle. 6 months later, that line would not have gotten the same chuckle that it did in that theater.
That's true.
And Gary Busey's
was there any
manual now too, but it wasn't meaning to pick.
The damage is, the damage is done for that poor guy. So
yeah.
But yeah, was there any other 80s specific horror movies that you
80s specifically
you feel that are worthy of mentioning?
I don't know if it's worthy of mention. Yeah, Company of Wolves. I thought was something that was.
Was that 80s?
That was 80s. Yeah, that was 80.
Oh,
83-ish. I want to say.
Was it really? I thought it was early 90.
No, Company of Wolves was definitely 80s. That was one that I remembered seeing in the video store. That image on the box cover of the person leaning their head back and the wolf snout coming out of their mouth. Yeah,
I could have sworn that was. Wow, that's completely. But that's a bizarre movie, though.
It is.
1984. Yeah, crazy. God, in my head, I saw it as a 90s movie, an early 90s. But yeah, interesting. But yeah, it's definitely completely unlike any of the other werewolf movies we've mentioned.
Yeah, much more of a fairy tale.
Fairy tale, exactly.
This is a horror movie version of Little Red Riding Hood, basically.
Looks like some of them are literally just fucking German shepherds.
Very well could be. It's been a while since I saw it.
After a while, there was a big time where I don't remember there being like quote unquote new werewolf movies. What was the I'm blanking on it now, but it was the one with Mark Dacascos. It's like a French. It was like during like the French Revolution, but and then like Mark Dacascos plays like no, it was 90s, early or maybe mid 90s or late 90s, maybe even early thousands. But he was basically like, what was it called? But I remember Mark Dacascos playing like a ninja, like a Native American ninja dude in this werewolf movie. Why?
I mean, all the elements are adding up to a great movie. There, I don't recall this one. It
was produced in French. It got a lot of Brotherhood of the Wolf. That's why. So
Brotherhood
Coming
of the Wolf.
Wolves. Okay. That's why. Yeah.
I've
so
heard
it
of
was.
I haven't seen it.
When there was an era when in the early thousands when like French action films were sort of like a bunch of French directors discovered like kung fu movies, and then they were doing like this really like. But Christophe Gans, it's like an arty French action movie about the French Revolution and werewolves. It's a fucking weird movie, but it's interesting to say the least. And I'm a huge Mark Dacascos fan. But again, he plays like a Native American kind of ninja dude. It's a weird movie, but it's definitely worth mentioning.
Yeah, I remember the title now that you've said it. The 90s, the only one I really have of note from the 90s, and it's arguably of note, is Wolf with Jack Nicholson.
I was going to get to that. So do you count that? I've heard people refer to it as a failure, like a giant disappointment or whatever. Like it was like it. I remember it getting like a lot of hype, and then I think I think at the time it came out, I probably did I see it in the theater? I might have actually saw it in the theater. I think I didn't see it until it came to rental though. But I remember my mom hated it.
In the theater. Oh really?
That's yeah, my mom. But
I saw it 3 times in the theater. I loved it. Full disclosure, I was a teenager. I think it came out, I think the opening day of Wolf was my last day of my freshman year of high school. So I was already on last day of school highs as I'm watching it. In fact, I remember getting in the car to go to the theater and being told, oh yeah, there's a car chase going on. O.J. Simpson's running from the police. So I was driving to see Wolf as OJ was with AJ Cowlings running from the police. So to give you an idea of when this film came out.
The time frame, yeah.
Also, full disclosure, I had been to the Fangoria Weekend of Horrors that year in Los Angeles, where Jack Nicholson made definitely his first, probably his last convention appearance ever. And there's something about, even now as an adult, there's something about seeing an event like that enamors you towards material. So of course I was obsessed with seeing Wolf because I had seen Jack Nicholson, and he was so cool. He's still traditionally, if someone asks me who's your favorite actor, I say Jack Nicholson. Don't always mean it, depends on the day, but he's like my instant answer.
I mean, like The Last Detail, Jack Nicholson,
Cuckoo's Nest, Jack Nicholson, The Shining, Jack Nicholson. Not as much Wolf, Jack Nicholson, but I don't think it's Jack's fault. I think this was the studio's fault. Last week when we talked about Popeye and we talked about the problem was Paramount asked for a Popeye movie and Robert Altman delivered a Robert Altman movie. Mm-hmm. I think Columbia asked for a werewolf movie and Mike Nichols delivered a Mike Nichols movie.
Mike Nichols movie, yeah. I can see that.
And I think, unlike Popeye, I think the studio tampered with this one. There is evidence of a horrific test screening where they went back and changed the ending, and it pretty famously ends with a werewolf battle. It's werewolf Jack Nicholson versus werewolf James Spader, which seems on its face like it should be the coolest thing ever, but it just is so cheesy. The stuntmen are so apparent. I mean, if you love Jack Nicholson, you know it's not Jack Nicholson jumping in slow motion through the air, but they kept his face, kind of like Werewolf of London. They didn't want to cover Jack's face as he turned into a wolf. And so they had to show their cards with the stuntman. So really sloppily done ending. I think if that movie had been done the way that Mike Nichols probably intended, it would have been considered one of the greatest werewolf movies of all time, because it's a really interesting exploration as to what the human being does with his wolf powers when he's a man. And in this, he's correcting a bad relationship with his wife. He's fixing a hostile takeover at work. He's using these new hunting instincts basically to become a better man and to become the person that he wants to be. But he's not, of course, believing that when the full moon comes up, he's going to actually go out and kill people, which he does. There's also a kind of a uneven love story between him and Michelle Pfeiffer, which seemed more genuine when it was those two actors in Witches of Eastwick.
I was going to say, yep.
But for some reason, by the time we got to Wolf, it seemed unbalanced. James Spader is actually really good in it as the villain.
Yes, he is.
So there's so much to praise about that movie that for the end to come along and just take a dump on the entire proceedings is really unfortunate. But I think that ending was tacked on by the studio, who wanted a more action-packed werewolf movie and realized that they had a Mike Nichols werewolf movie.
I gotta be honest. I think this movie came out. I would think it was 16 or 17, and I think the ending was my favorite part at the time.
Because it's werewolf versus werewolf. How cool is that? Except for it belongs in a different movie. It's a good ending to a different movie.
By the way, just to I did look it up, and not that we go by Rotten Tomatoes as some sort of Bible, but 60% audience score and a 42% 60% critic score and a 42% audience score. So yeah, I remember, because again, the trailers, and I think there was a lot of hype, and I remember Entertainment Tonight was in love with it, and
Jack Nicholson had just in real life gone nuts on some dude with his golf clubs, wrecked his car in the middle of traffic. So we were ready to see him become a werewolf.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it wasn't what people thought.
But Mike Nichols is, I mean, it's kind of a weird choice, kind of.
Yeah.
But
agreed.
But yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing. Like I said, and again, the fact that it was a big, because most of the movies we've talked about have been low budget, not big stars, been more quote unquote B movie level type stuff or low budget.
Yes, even for the studio
Wolf was a big budget, huge, pretty much the biggest stars of 1994 almost in this movie. So,
Jack
but
Nicholson,
yeah, just
James
didn't
Spader,
deliver.
Plummer, along with Mike Nichols, was a sellable name at that point too. I mean, for anybody that doesn't know, and how do you not know, Mike Nichols did The Graduate and Carnal Knowledge and just so many of the greatest films ever made.
Interesting movie though.
Yes.
But yeah, so at that point in the 90s, by that point too, by the 90s with Anne Rice and vampires had another kind of big. Vampires were big in the 80s. They were big in the 90s. They were big in the thousands. Vampires always, every few years, have that big resurgence. But the 90s when you had, Interview with the Vampire come out, and then everybody fell in love with the Anne Rice novels, and then you had the movie adaptation, which was a lot of there was controversy behind it, but it was very popular. But so vampires has sort of run away and sort of been like the cool. By the way, we also didn't talk about Teen Wolf. I feel like we do need to quickly talk about Teen Wolf. I love Teen Wolf. Who doesn't love Michael J. Fox? I even love Teen Wolf 2, which is beat for beat the exact same movie as Teen Wolf 1, literally beat for beat. It starred because Michael J. Fox was a big star, and I think they were trying to make Jason Bateman a big star. It didn't work at the time. Now we know that Jason Bateman is a fucking genius, and everything he does is incredible. But at the time, not so much.
He was meant for bigger things than Teen Wolf 2.
To come.
And that is, by the way, let's point out that is Teen Wolf TOO, Teen Wolf 2.
That's right. Yes, exactly. Absolutely.
But yes, the first Teen Wolf was a lot of fun. I remember it came out the same year as Back to the Future. Who has ever had a year as good as Michael J. Fox's 1985?
For real. I think Michael J. Fox still might be the single most lovable actor of all. I mean, if you don't like Michael J. Fox, you there's something wrong with you. But I mean, he's the first diehard Republican I ever enjoyed.
And you're talking about Alex P. Keaton, by the way.
Exactly. Not exactly.
I don't want to put that on Michael J. Fox.
Yeah, exactly. But I remember the time being like, well, I guess they can't all be bad. Anyways, not to get political on this podcast, but yeah, I think it's definitely, you have to talk about. I mean, especially because they were big. Teen Wolf was a big movie. It was made money. It also gave me one of my favorite T-shirts, which is "What are you looking at, Dick Nose?" That I was nice enough to get. I was nice enough to get a repro of that shirt as a Christmas gift a few years back, as well as Jack Burton's tank top. I got both of those in the same year. So.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, styles, very on PC, if you go back and watch those movies, some of the lines are a little cringy, maybe not the most politically correct, but...
Sure. I think parts of Asia, too, it was pitched as like Teen Wolf to the Future sort of thing. Like, they were really trying desperately to turn this into a...
like a sequel?
Back to the Future.
Okay, well,
I'll have to look that up, but I'm sure that I think it was, I don't know what part of Asia it was, whether it was China or Japan, but it was played up like Future Boy Wolf or something like that.
They were trying to force it.
Right.
I will say though, Devin, sometimes the rats are coming, but the wolves are here. So you gotta do what you gotta do to sell a movie. But
exactly.
we haven't talked about it, and again, I don't know if we're going in chronological order, but I have to say one of my favorite contemporary werewolf movies, and I think probably the last truly great, like really hardcore werewolf movie is Dog Soldiers.
See, it's been years since I've seen it. I was hoping you'd bring it up because I remember enjoying it, but I wasn't as big of a fan as people seem to be. It was maybe built up too much to me at the time.
Yeah, I can totally see that. So I rented it with hearing
about Dog Soldiers. Yes, please.
Yeah. So first off, we talked earlier about the werewolf designs of Howling, and I think one of the things that made Dog Soldiers so amazing was the designs of the werewolves in this, because they got these very tall, physically imposing actors and then put them on these. They're actually used for like quadriplegic or legless runners, like for people. Yeah. So they're these spring mechanism things for, if you've probably seen them before, like people.
Yeah, I didn't know that's what they used for that movie.
Yeah. So they used a little bit of a contraption for that to give them both extra height and give them some of the bounce and mobility, and then also that shape of the wolf leg. So like the wolves themselves stood like 7 feet tall and over in it, and so that's it. But very great practical effects. It's all practical effects. Yeah, I think it was the first thing that Neil Marshall did. I don't know if that's 100% accurate. I could probably look that up. It was definitely the first thing he was really known for. I know it was like this, and then The Descent. Basically, it's a bunch of British soldiers.
Pertwee's one of them, right?
What's up?
Pertwee is one of them.
Yes, he is. But yeah, so it's these 6 British soldiers, and they're doing this like training exercise, and they basically get trapped in this cabin, and the cabin basically gets assaulted by a pack of werewolves, and it's basically kind of like Last Man Standing, like the Alamo with werewolves and British soldiers. But it's just like pretty much like a action horror movie.
It's a completely different take on the werewolf story, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, exactly. And these wolves are terrifying. They're vicious, like hunters. And yeah, so this becomes like a, sort of this like, can we survive a night, being attacked by werewolves? And special effects are great. The acting is really good. The direction is, for a first film, like, in a very low budget. I'd have to say it's probably, I could probably find what the budget was, but you could tell they didn't have much to work with, but he made the most of what they had. But dude, yeah, I mean, it's very tense. The werewolves are terrifying. Once the action kicks up, it moves at a really quick pace. So, yeah, very memorable. Like I said, it's pretty much one note in the fact it is what it is. It's soldiers fighting werewolves, but it's a great escapist movie, really fun way to spend an hour and a half. But I feel bad because Neil Marshall I thought he was a really talented director. Between this and then The Descent, he did that new Hellboy, which wasn't much loved. I thought was actually really fun, despite some issues. I think the designs in it actually were better than fucking Guillermo del Toro's, but that's a whole different conversation.
A new Hellboy was going to be a uphill battle to begin with.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. But probably one of the last really, for me, like super memorable werewolf movies. Was there other? I mean, there's one more I want to talk about for me specifically, but it's the one I wanted to save for the end.
I don't know whether I'm going to call that out and it'll be the same movie, but I did want to bring up Ginger Snaps.
I was just talking about Ginger Snaps too. The first one specifically. I think the second one's good. I need to rewatch it. I haven't seen it, but the original Ginger Snaps, fantastic.
Yeah,
great casting.
Amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. What a brilliant, even just the concept is brilliant.
They could have clobbered you over the head with it.
Yes.
It's a female werewolf. She's a teenage female werewolf. They don't hide at all that they're linking this, at least metaphorically, to the start of her menstrual cycle. And that could have been a club to the head. It could have just seemed hokey or exploitive or whatever. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it was written by a woman, that it doesn't come off that way. But I think it's more than anything else, I think it's the movie's sense of humor that keeps that from hitting you over the head. The whole movie's so funny, but at the same time so sad and really about the relationship of these two girls. One is growing up just a little bit faster than the other one, and the werewolf thing is certainly pushing that along. And I think I have a sister. I only have one sister. I can't talk about the bonds between two sisters as much as I can talk about the bonds of siblings. But I think this is something that sisters experience a lot, where one is just a little ahead of the other one. And once they hit that point in puberty where not only are they interested in boys, but boys are interested in them, and kind of being in with a certain crowd starts to become a thing, I think that causes a lot of rifts between sisters where one feels left back. And in this case, the sister being left back is not a werewolf. And it creates such an incredible story emotionally, even though the movie's very funny and very violent, very gory, but a very emotional story where you're really pulling for her to be able to get Ginger to snap back to who she was.
Well played. Yeah, I mean, and you have a young Catherine Isabel who's, great and become like kind of very much a modern day scream queen. The director, I feel bad because the director hasn't really done much. I mean, he did The Dark, which came out almost, very soon after that, and then hasn't done some TV, but it hasn't really done much, which is kind of sad because
surprising.
Which is very strange. But yeah, I think that's great that you mentioned. I totally had slipped my mind, but yeah, I think it's one of the most interesting, very much a product of its time. Has that early thousands kind of feel to it.
Yeah, it feels that late 90s, early 2000s indie film.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's a great movie. I know it's actually a very important movie to a lot of people I know. And like I said, changing the script, doing something different. And like I said, like Catherine Isabel was fucking really great in that role of the more developed older sister who's turning into a werewolf. But yeah, great. It's great. Like I said, the sequels, I know I've seen the second one.
The second one's a direct sequel. The third one's a prequel, which...
That's it, yeah.
I didn't see it. It felt a little like it was jumping the shark. Like it was the same actors playing earlier versions of themselves, and this was how they were fated to become a werewolf family. I don't know exactly.
See, I did not.
To me, that cheapens the whole experience of the first film. It may be a good movie. It has some decent reviews. Some people say it's better than the second one. No one says it's better than the first one. But it seems like something that didn't need to be a prequel, a period piece prequel of the same thing happening to other family members of this exact same family. It's so much better when it's random that these girls are attacked by a werewolf in their small hometown in the original indie film.
Yeah, and the thing is, there's a lot of movies that came, like that movie May. There was a lot of movies that came out of that time where these sort of like kind of like indie, kind of more, I don't want to say feminist, because not that it's a feminism, not that that's a criticism or anything, but I'm saying I don't know if that's necessarily the right word. Like much more of like telling horror stories, but from a different point of view, from a different experience, and very much at the time very unique and different. But yeah, great movie. I feel like it's like I said, I think it's a movie that's very important to a lot of people. Definitely one of the best movies of that era.
Absolutely.
So the last one I wanted to talk about, and I feel like I wanted to sort of save it at the end, even though, there's been, definitely many werewolf movies after it's been made, but is the 2005 movie Cursed.
Yes, Cursed. I almost forgot about Cursed.
Yes, I mean, it's one of Wes Craven's last directed movies. It's his, it was a partnership he had again with Kevin Williamson, who they are more notorious for the Scream franchise. It's basically very much in the similar vein, very kind of self-referential, very modern, the dialogue is real fast and snappy in the way that Kevin Williamson was really known for. It's got Christina Ricci and a young Jesse Eisenberg who doesn't look any different now than he did then. Like, I don't know if that dude just doesn't age. He's eternally 25. But, it's obviously has some problems. It's got some pacing problems.
They did release a director's cut eventually. I don't know if that's what's available now streaming or on Blu-ray.
I'd be interested to see.
There were two different versions for sure released on DVD when it first came out. And I think it was a studio involvement issue on Cursed.
I believe that, yeah. Poor Wes Craven seems to have that happen to him. But one thing I liked about it is, first off, definitely has nods to the Wolfman and that mythology, especially like with the mark. It has a lot of that mythology still in it, but in a much more modern setting. But I think it's fun. I watched it for the first time. I didn't see it when it was new, so I probably watched it for the first time maybe 5 or 6 years ago. and just kind of put it on being like, oh, let me just watch this. And I was like, fuck, this is really fun. Of course it is. It's Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson. Even if it's not the best movie ever, it's still going to be better than a lot of other movies that I've seen. So,
right.
And I love Christina Ricci, and that era of Christina Ricci, I think, was like still, you know, she still had like her star power and stuff.
It's some prime Ricci at that point.
Exactly. But and I love her. She can carry any like a movie. I know they fucked with the werewolf designs and the werewolf makeup, and it was originally supposed to be practical effects, and then they decided like, no, let's, you know, computer generation, the CG stuff is really trendy and popular right now, so let's go with that. So that's really depressing. But again, it's fun. It's definitely, like I said, I love that it has homages to the old Gypsy Curse of, you know, the Lon Chaney Jr. one. And so that was really cool. And I think, you know, it's probably the last, you know, there's been a ton of werewolf movies since, and that's why I was trying to think of someone even from the last 2 years, because I know there's been a ton. But
Wolf Cop was the only one I've seen that really stood out in any way, but it stood out in a way that was like, it's kind of better than a Trauma movie. Which is not throwing shade at Trauma. It's just what to expect from Wolf Cop.
It's exactly what you want it to be for a movie called Wolf Cop. It's a stupid, fun,
great effects. Oddly enough,
great. Yeah, and it's that kind of like lowbrow humor, but it's like the makeup. It said the makeup effects are great. The design of a Wolf Cop is cool. And it's one of those movies that, like, you know, if they do 3 or 4 sequels, I'll probably watch them all. It's a good escapist fun, and there's nothing wrong with that, especially when we're talking werewolf movies. So.
Now, there is something wrong with a specific werewolf movie that I almost didn't bring up. I would normally not bring it up, but it links the two of us together.
Okay.
In 1997, you and me and a friend of ours named Casey, who has got to come on and co-host the show with us sometime. We
Absolutely.
all packed into the car and went and saw a test screening of An American Werewolf in Paris.
Oh my God, I forgot. Oh, and there's one more I do have to talk about. But yes, exactly.
Still the only time I've ever seen that movie. I did not bother seeing it when it came out again. When you said CGI werewolf, it popped into my head. We were watching a cut of the movie that was so raw that the effects had not been done yet. And it was digital effects on the werewolves, which meant that we lost anything that would have been satisfying about the movie, potentially. In fact, I think at the climactic moment where the good guy defeats the bad guy, the screen just goes black and they threw up a title card that said he eats his heart. And
exactly. Yep.
But I remember
his
seeing
ass.
that. Bit his ass. Yes, guys shouting out in werewolf
Yo,
bites
Trey.
an ass. Guy in the theater. Yes, you tell the story.
Yeah, guy in the theater. I was just in the middle of all these here. Trey, bit his ass.
And that's more memorable than anything else.
Funny, it was the best part of the whole thing.
And I remember going to Fat Burger after, the 3 of us, and just laughing and laughing.
Laughing. Exactly.
And it's really the only reason to mention American Werewolf in Paris ever.
What a piece of shit.
I saw that.
You're saying the same thing. I didn't even bother to see it when it was actually released with the actual, because I was like, the movie was so bad. I was like, I don't even give a shit. Real quick, though, I do feel like we need to talk about one movie, and then, like, I do remember this movie, Late Phases, that came about 6 years ago that I actually did really like.
I heard about that. I wanted to see that. I didn't catch it.
Yeah, it's really good. I would recommend it. But we did talk about The Wolfman, the Benicio del Toro starring direct remake of The Wolfman.
The only other actor to ever play Lawrence Talbot.
I have not actually seen the full movie. I started watching it. I remember it came out to HBO. I put it on, and I ended up being like, and I heard bad things about it.
Yeah.
But I put it on, like, and it was, I was like, this is dragging, and then I probably got 45 minutes into it. But did you see it, and what were your thoughts?
I did see it. It's not really worthy of note. It's a lot of the elements are there. Benicio del Toro and Anthony Hopkins are both in it. They're playing father and son. That, on the surface of it, seems like it should be a great movie. Benicio del Toro as a werewolf is right on its face. It is just a good idea and somehow does not ever come together. I was really hoping, maybe the expectations were too high. I was really hoping that it would kind of somehow fit into making a trilogy somehow out of Bram Stoker's Dracula and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein years previously and kind of fit into that sort of thing. I see now, of course, they were trying to start the Dark Universe then.
Yep.
Trying to lay the groundwork for whatever they're going to ever end up doing with the Universal Monsters in terms of creating a new multiverse. Latest news on that, by the way, is that the next Wolfman is going to be Ryan Gosling, and they're doing it based on a story that he pitched, and he wanted to direct it himself, but it was ultimately decided that him dealing with all the makeup was going to detract from him being able to direct the film as well as perform in it. So someone else is going to direct it, but it's his story. And I think
Interesting.
if it's going along the lines of what they did with The Invisible Man, then great. If it's going along the lines of what they did with The Mummy or The Wolfman in 2010, it's doomed.
Thanks. Yeah, 100%. Well, that's interesting. I didn't hear about that, so I'm be down for some.
That's fresh news.
That's good to hear. See, that's what you listen to this podcast for. Fresh news.
Sure.
I do want to say, because I feel like any opportunity to bring up what we do in shadows, I need to take. But I do think the second greatest quote, besides obviously Wolfman's Got Nards, is "We're werewolves, not swearwolves," which is still the greatest, second greatest line about werewolves ever. But yeah, Devin, this was great, and I'm sure people out there we probably missed 1,000 of people's favorites.
There's a bunch of people right now wondering why we didn't talk about Twilight or Underworld, but we're never going to talk about Twilight or Underworld, so get over it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I wrote the script for Twilight when I was like 14, and the movie I wrote probably was better than all those. And I know people that love the Underworld movies, but it's like fucking.
I saw the first one in the theater. I couldn't do it.
I didn't even like The Matrix, let alone movies that are trying to rip off The Matrix. So, anyways, but Devin, this was really fun. Hopefully, our listeners enjoyed it as much as we. Well, I'm presupposing that you enjoyed this. I enjoyed it. Hopefully, you also
enjoyed it.
Talking about werewolves is always fun. But yeah, listeners, if you have any suggestions or any movies that we missed, or if you think we're morons and you think Underworld is amazing, let us know, man. Me and Devin aren't above criticism. We're not always right, just mostly right.
Usually,
that's sarcasm. Usually. But yeah, that was really fun.
And let us know on Facebook by searching Den of Sin Podcast. That's Sin, CIN, or on Twitter at Den_of_sin. And you can let us know exactly what you think of us. But be nice. Be nice to us. Be nice to each other.
Yeah, exactly. Just be civil. I know it's impossible on the internet, but try to be civil. We're just talking about movies. It's not life or death, people.
Exactly. And thank you again for talking to me this week, James. This is always fun. You and I, we fall in line so often with our opinions, and it's kind of fun when we don't too.
Exactly.
I'm thankful that you ever came up with this idea, and thanks for showing up every week, and thanks to all of our listeners to show up and listen to us have fun.
Exactly. Always a pleasure.
Have a good one, James.
All right. Take care.
Bye.